And our mission is to make disciples. And that's what it looks like. A disciple is a person who lives their life to know and walk with Jesus, and then at the same time live a postured life where you're putting yourself in connection with somebody who doesn't know Jesus. That's what a disciple is. In other words, that's a missionary. You can look at it that way. A disciple is a missionary. And this transition from our mission in January to our global mission in February is very appropriate, because there is no such thing as a church that's not a missionary church. Wouldn't you agree? And there's no such thing as a follower of Jesus who's not a missionary. We are saved in order that God can use us for his inevitable coming kingdom. And that's the great privilege that we all have, no matter what we come from or where we've been. God uses our life. And our purpose this month is to inform, interest, and involve every man, woman, and young person in the World Kingdom movement, the greatest movement in human history. We take a whole month to do it. I don't know how many churches do that, but we do it every year because this is the nearest thing to God's heart. And we want you to come away from this month saying, God, what way can you use me to sponsor, to send, to go? And all of us play a part. You'll notice that I'm wearing a t-shirt. All the worship team wore this t-shirt. How many of you know what the symbol is? Some of you do. If you've been paying attention to the news, you've seen it. This is an Arabic letter equivalent to RN, which is representing the word that ISIS, the militant terrorist organization ISIS, the label that they use for Christians. It would be the same thing as our Nazarene. And they spray paint this letter on businesses, Christian-owned businesses, homes, and churches. And if you go out the door some morning and see this spray painted on your house or on your fence or on your garage, what that means is you've been given a message, and here's the message. You have 4 options. You must either pay a extortion tax for your own protection, which you know that's kind of a joke, or you must convert to Islam, or you must leave right away and leave your property to us, or you'll die. And the displacement of people around the world because of this symbol is being worn by Christians around the world in solidarity with our brothers and sisters who are being persecuted. And these t-shirts are for sale for $15. Now, we don't pay that much for the shirt, but the net proceeds from the shirt go to support our work with Syrian refugees in Jordan or with Kurdish refugees in northern Iraq. And you heard about those earlier. And the other thing is how cool to have a t-shirt. You wear it to Hutch's and somebody will look at you and say, what in the world is that? And you look at them and you say, I'm one. And you can tell them the story. I'm in solidarity with brothers and sisters across the world. A great conversation piece. I would love every one of you to buy a t-shirt. And they're in the back in the fellowship hall available. They'll be available all month. What a great cause and what a great message. And I want you to take out this brochure, which is the monthly schedule. You can read the events for yourself through the month. We have special guest speakers. Our theme is scattered. Tonight, we're hearing from these team updates, and also you'll be able to hear about upcoming missions trips. We have several scheduled each year. Next week, Dr. Dale Woods, Area Director for Middle East, amazing stories of what God's doing in the world. And next Sunday afternoon, after the service, is an all-church potluck on the 12th of February. So you bring your mayonnaise sandwiches and throw them in with everybody else's, and we'll have a great meal. That evening, Dale Woods is going to be giving a mini seminar. It's a missiology, it's perspectives on mission. And it's so important. We would love so many people to come participate in this. We're providing childcare that Sunday night. It's a great capsule overview of mission. And then the next week, the Mellingers, and then next Sunday night, the 19th, our teens are sponsoring a prayer stations from around the world. It takes over the whole middle part of the church. It's an amazing event that our teens put together. And then the last week, Reverend Hani Salah, who working with Iraqi refugees in northern Iraq. And at that last Sunday, we will have a great missions offering. We'll end the month with the flags receding out, and then we'll have a great missions offering. And our goal is to kickstart our missions investment for the year by having $75,000 in hand. On the back panel of this brochure, it shows you in detail every dollar that goes out the door, all the missions projects and missionaries that we support. The important thing for you to know is that every dollar invested in these, they're carefully vetted, every dollar invested in these has exponential return because every one of these leaders is multiplying leaders around the world. And that's important for you to know. Our missiology, this may not float your boat, I just have to say it. As a Free Methodist Church, our missiology is absolutely phenomenal. And if you want to know what that is, come back to hear Dale Woods next Sunday night. A missiology is the strategy and the values with which you engage with other cultures with sensitivity and creativity and respect without compromising the gospel. And I am so thankful that we have a very savvy leadership, and every dollar that we invest in world missions has exponential return. And we're very confident in those leaders around the world. Aren't you excited? Here's the other thing about that last Sunday of the month, last commercial. Throughout this month, I want you to be watching, looking around, meeting somebody, and that Sunday I want to challenge you, whoever you are, to invite somebody in this congregation or maybe outside the congregation to join you for lunch. Doesn't have to be fancy. You want to invite them into your home? Fine. You want to go to McDonald's? Fine. You want to share mayonnaise sandwiches on a park bench? That's fine. But I want you to choose somebody who you don't know. If you're a student, introduce yourself to a student that you don't know. Maybe someone from a different culture, different ethnicity, someone who comes from a different background. Doesn't matter. That's the only organization we're going to do. We're going to leave it up to you. But it's a wonderful missiological step is to simply learn to spend time with someone who you don't know. Ask them good questions. Learn about their life. And that's what we're going to do the last Sunday of February. Our theme is scattered. How many of you feel scattered this morning? At a time when displacement of the world's people perhaps is higher than any time in recorded history. United Nations estimates in 2015, and that number has actually grown since then, over 65 million people displaced. Lost their home, lost their homeland, lost their citizenship, stuck in a place that's of a different culture perhaps, different language, and the chaos that the world events of these last few years have created for people is immense, and tremendous amount of suffering. This month, our goal is to unpack and to reveal a side of the news that you're never going to hear on cable or network news. What the news broadcasts as only fear and reason for you to be afraid, God and God's people see as opportunity to spread the gospel. And the gospel is making great inroads in the most difficult places of the world. I got to get a drink of water. So it's an exciting month ahead. I want to turn your attention to Acts chapter 8, 1 through 8. This is our theme verse for the month. If you know the book of Acts, this follows on the first martyrdom of a man named Stephen, who was stoned to death for proclaiming the gospel. And there was a man named Saul, who was a leader in the Pharisee sect, who was there giving consent to his death. And Saul, of course, would later be converted and would become Paul. And chapter 8 begins with Saul was there giving approval to his death. On that day, a great persecution broke out against the church at Jerusalem, and everyone except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. Now that scattering eventually crossed great distances, but just immediately that day they lost their homes. Godly men buried Stephen and mourned deeply for him, but Saul began to destroy the church, going from house to house. He dragged off men and women and put them in prison. Doesn't that sound eerily familiar to what's going on right now? You see? Paul was instigating a genocide. Those who had been scattered, this is the great verse 4, those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. Philip, one of the apostles, went down to a city in Samaria and proclaimed the Christ there. When the crowds heard Philip and saw the miraculous signs he did, they all paid close attention to what he said. With shrieks, evil spirits came out of many. Many paralytics and cripples were healed. And look at verse 8. In the middle of this chaos and heartbreak, there was great joy in that city where Philip went. The word is diaspora. Diaspora. It's a Greek word that's been used throughout the church. And if you know the history of the church, you'll know that God always scatters his people at opportune strategic times in order to force the church's gospel to go out in the world. Diaspora is a word that's similar. It's a botanical word. And you know what happens to dandelions? Anybody have dandelion problems in the yard? A beautiful flower grows up, a yellow flower, then what happens? The yellow petals fall away, and what takes its place? This little ball of fur, which is really thousands of seeds, and the first whiff of air that hits that dandelion does what? Blows those things everywhere, and then what do you get? More dandelions. And that is the missionary pattern of the world. In fact, I would take it a step further. Wherever God's people have failed to spread the gospel, God has brought the world to God's people. Immigration in America is reaching new heights every day. God is bringing the world to us. So we're living in this upheaval, but there's good news. And you're going to hear some amazing stories this month. I just want to ask a question as we begin, as we prepare for communion. I want to pull back a little bit and ask the question, what makes a missionary? If I'm called to be a missionary, what's the first thing, the first impetus, the first motive that makes me a missionary? What would make Philip go to a place in Samaria which was hostile to the Orthodox Jew? Orthodox Jews would never go there. They would circumvent that area in order to avoid those kinds of people. Why would Philip go there? Well, we know that Philip went there because he saw the Lord do it. Why would pastors in Aleppo, which is being absolutely ravaged by ISIS, why would there be Christian pastors who would choose to stay there when everybody else was running for their life? We're seeing and hearing about that. Many of those have lost their lives. They stay in those places. They stay in Mosul. They stay in the parts of Nineveh which have been overrun by ISIS. Why would people do that? These pastors stay not only to care for Christians who are left behind, but they also stay to minister to Muslims, Yazidis. That's a sect in northern Iraq. Why do people do that? Why would Jeremiah Small, grew up in Washington State? In 2005, he was, he would have been 26 years old, heard a presentation of a Christian classical education school in northern Iraq, inviting young teachers to come and spend a year there, and he felt called to do that. The idea is you go spend a year there and then you're done. Well, he spent the first year there, and then he went back the second year, and then he went back the third year, then the fourth year, then the fifth year, and then the sixth year. In Sulaymaniyah, which is the northern part of Iraq, which was a little bit away. If you know the history, 2005, the Iraqi war was still pretty hot. But up in that part of the country, it was a little bit safer. He went there to teach. The school was run by Christians, and yet most of the students were Muslim. And Jeremiah loved those students. Took them on hiking trips, rock climbing. He learned the terrain of that country better than the natives did. He helped the students raise money to build a library in that great city. They helped raise money to build, to strengthen firefighting and law enforcement. He invested fully with both feet in that community, and the students learned to love him. He was outspoken as a Christian, unapologetic with his faithfulness to Jesus Christ, and yet he treated everybody equally, and the community respected him highly. He went home Christmas time and summertime just for a time to go back to Washington to be with his family. His mother said, every time we saw him get on the plane, in my heart, I thought, I wonder if I'm going to see my son again. In spring of 2012, at the beginning of class, Jeremiah was bowing in prayer to pray for the students, which he did every morning. And an 18-year-old student, a junior in high school, came into the classroom and stood in the back and pulled out a pistol and killed him. Funeral for Jeremiah Small was a huge outpouring of love for this student. You got to ask the question, why would a young guy with a whole future ahead of him put his life at risk, choose one of the hottest spots in the world in order to live and proclaim the gospel? Why would he do that? What makes a missionary? Before we go any further this month, I want to answer that question. If you say, Lord, I want to be yours, I want to tell you the very first place it has to begin. You know who this guy is? He's not a missionary, although maybe he is. It's Pippin in Lord of the Rings, Tolkien's trilogy. Tim Keller, in a sermon, made reference to this, and I caught it with a group of guys last week, and I thought, I think I remember the scene. These guys are always in a tight spot. If you watch the film, they're always in danger, and this is one of those worst tight spots where Pippin is about to be killed by the Witch King. He's down on the ground, he's vulnerable, life is over, and then he hears the distant horns, the riders of Rohan, coming, and they rescue him. Great story. But Tolkien adds in the commentary, which may not be in the film, he said, from that day on, Pippin could no longer hear the sound of distant horns without breaking into tears, because it reminded him of his salvation. What makes a missionary? You have to have something in your life. You have to have a distant horn in your life. I met my wife, Linda, my first 2 years of college, and after I got my wife to be, I left school. I got what I needed, so I went to... Students, you didn't hear me say that. Don't do that. But I went to a different school because she transferred, and I followed her. And I was a student at Greenville College, and Linda and I used to always sit in the front over here. We'd hold hands during church. It's a wonderful thing. And I don't remember if it was my dad or Jim Wilson who was the worship leader that day, but there was an old gentleman who always sat right where Charlie and Mary sit. His name was J.G. Crandall, an old retired pastor. He was the father of Bob Crandall. Some of you old-timers might know that name. And my dad or Jim Wilson said, J.G., would you sing a song for us? I was sitting right over there. I remember this. And J.G. Crandall was a dear, sweet old man. He was not much more than 5 feet old, hunched over. And I remember he gripped the back of the pew and he pulled himself up, his gnarly hands, tilted his head back, closed his eyes. And with this gravelly voice, no accompaniment, all by himself, he sang, Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. And he had his head up, his eyes closed, and tears were just streaming down his face. There wasn't a dry eye in the whole place as I sat there and watched this old saint. As he sang, he heard distant horns. The horns of his salvation. What makes a missionary? It's only a person who first is overwhelmed by the saving grace of God. And until you find your place there, you'll never really find the motive to be used by God to reach the next one and the next one.